We are live. This is the inaugural Where We Can Agree stream. We're
I'm
going
amazed to
cross
be here.
we're going cross border and almost across the continent from the icy plains of southern Ontario to the warm and sunny desert in springtime of Arizona. My co-host is Greg Swann. How do you do today, sir?
I am delighted to be here. I am stunned and amazed at this software. I'm delighted to see how it works out on the streaming end. I can't watch it while I'm doing it, but I'll watch it later and see how it works out. But I think it's wicked cool. This is Restream that we're doing this on, and I think it's a brilliant idea given that platform competition is becoming an issue, and that is a great thing. That's a wonderful thing to have competition for they who shall not be named for fear of being demonetized or whatever, but to be able to hit two platforms at once, or I think they can hit like 30 platforms at
Oh,
once, is just amazing. With obviously a number of guests. I mean, I'm not filling anything up on the frame here, nor are you in your invisible state, but it looks like you could have six people going at once. That's cool. I don't know how the audio is working. I don't have a headset on, and I don't know if that's affecting the audio, but that's cool too. I'm just rejoicing in this software
I'm
before we begin talking about anything else, because I think it's a really cool solution to a problem that is ever more imminent.
Yes, and I'm new at all of this. And when I signed up, apparently it doesn't go to Rumble. So we're only going to YouTube at this juncture. I when I tried to look at how to set up streaming in Rumble, and at first it said, "Oh, you're going to need a software like Restream." So I checked out Restream and signed up, and then I tried to connect to it. Tried to connect it to Rumble, and apparently there's no connection. So I'm not sure how that's going to work.
Okay, this is, Rumble is young. Obviously, I would think Restream is young. This stuff will be worked out, but API problems or just Rumble problems, because Rumble is new, and I run into trouble with them all the time. Not to criticize them, it's just what happens when you're young and iterating, as they say in the software business. They are discovering their bugs by doing a live beta test with you and me as the beta testers. And that's the way that Web 2.0 works. That's obviously the way that Web 3.0 is going to work, if there ever is such a thing.
And
And
they
I
want
mean,
my
that's
money.
kind of a given. It's kind of, you're never really sure which version of the software you're using anyway, because they could be A/B testing you. And so you're using the live beta and you don't know it, and when you come back, you try it again, it works, and you think, oh well, they fixed it, and you go back a third time and you're back in the live beta and it doesn't work anymore. Um,
Well,
that's our world.
they want my money to set it up properly, and I'm not ready to put any money into
I
it.
totally get that. I totally get that. That we will discover everything we need to know about this before any money gets committed, because
Right. And I learned to do things like I learned how to snowboard, which was I see people do things and I say, "Hey, that looks cool." And I try it and land on my face for a few times until I figure out how to get my snowboard underneath me when I hit the landing area. So there'll be a lot of landing on faces, I'm sure. We just went snowboarding yesterday. Well, got back yesterday, and it was gorgeous. And the kids are really taking it for being able to get them out there once or twice a year. They're really taking to it.
very cool. Very cool. I like it. I mean, I talk about skateboarding all the time because I think it's a really unique political environment, and it is useful for understanding how an individual polis becomes a type of polities, and how that type of polities becomes a civilization. The skateboard is a petri dish of civilization, of Greek civilization, and it's amazing how well it works, and how underschooled the young men who make it work are. They're not classicists, and they're not Bronze Age debauchery fanatics or anything at all like that. They're
Mhm.
just trying to get the job done in the way that's most efficient, most effective, and most enjoyable for everyone. And they achieve a state of social eudaimonia. It's utterly amazing, a thriving that you would insist can't possibly exist, particularly with that population, couldn't possibly exist. And instead, they achieve a peaceful thriving. The peace is never broken. On the rare occasions that it is, the problem is solved instantaneously because everyone knows how everyone else should be behaving. It's utterly amazing to me. But the downside of the skate park is all the injuries. It's the snow is a much more forgiving substance to fall into if you misjudge where to do your
Yeah.
360 or your 540.
Yeah, it does. It is a little more forgiving, but it also means that the risks taken are on a much
Substantially greater, I would
grander
expect. Plus,
scale.
you have a kind of an inexhaustible source of velocity in the sense that you have to go downhill to
Yeah.
snowboard, and therefore stopping presents a problem all on its own, or rolling to a stop.
Yeah.
You couldn't talk me into doing either one of these things. I will sit at the skate park for hours and watch the politics in action. I mean, literally, like I'm watching a petri dish. I'm a scientist at a microscope,
Yeah.
but there is no way in the world you could ever get me on a skateboard and a snowboard, even less.
Yeah. Well, the there I was perusing Twitter in my semi days of waking up this morning, and somebody was saying something about this being a low cycle in the mysticism. That people were starting to feel like there's a depressing vibe out there, and I'm like, I just got back. I was watching people go off 40-foot jumps, doing all kinds of tricks, backflips and front flips, and amazing things. And I mean, you can't do that. You can't watch that without having some kind of hope for humanity. These people are amazing.
Absolutely. The quest for
And
excellence in that kind of thing. And it's at the amateur level that it's so inspiring. That
mhm,
mostly there isn't any amateur sport. There's softball for men or bowling or whatever. But skateboarding and snowboarding are basically what's left of competitive sports that men really strive for excellence as amateurs. And as soon as somebody invents a new stunt, whether it's a pro or an amateur, then everybody else has to figure out how to do it. You find this in music, and I think it's great there too, especially like in jazz, where a new technique is new for about 6 weeks, and then everyone can do it. I think that's a wonderful thing. I think that's one of the amazing traits of humanity is our ability to push each other toward ever greater, previously thought to be impossible feats of wonder.
yeah, it's
And
like
yeah, going out and seeing it, and frankly, being outdoors and being in the sunshine,
yeah, it
is
was
going to change your attitude completely.
so gorgeous, and that makes the snow soft, and there's nothing to do because the other parts of the hill start getting sloppy and slow, and there's nothing to do but just try to go off of the biggest jump that you feel comfortable doing. Because at my age, I have to feel comfortable, but the kids' age, they launch themselves and they land and they get back up and they laugh. And for me, it would be devastating, but it's just so enjoyable to be out there and to see them, and the camaraderie. There's a little bit of animus, like if you do the wrong thing, you get or piss somebody off. It happens, but generally, what you get is people inspiring each other. Uh, they're encouraging you. Like some guy does the biggest hit, and then he watches you or your little kid, your teenager, go off the first time and bail, and he's just right there encouraging you to try it again, or this is what you did wrong, and it's a real community.
It is. It's utterly, utterly amazing, and we have such disdain for the skateboarders that we cannot imagine their unbelievable civility. I mean, literally, what does civility mean? That's what it means. It means, having enough regard for your fellow man to leave him alone, but also a little bit more in the form of sociable love that says, I want to do better, but I want you to do better too. And so I'll tell you what I know in hopes that you'll get better today, and we'll both celebrate. We'll celebrate our victories together. This is a wonderful thing. That's brotherhood, literally brotherhood.
Now, pose
It,
this to. Oh, sorry. Finish your thought.
no, it's okay. Go ahead.
Like in the internet, in the tech world, when somebody makes a new innovation, they immediately want to protect it and keep it from being shared. And you have these the law is sorry, what is the word for
Copyright law,
copyright law?
intellectual property
And
law.
try to protect your intellectual property, and it really stifles things uh, in comparison, right? And people copy each other all the time, but you have this legal constraint.
Lawsuits, license fees. If you want to avoid the license fee, the lawsuit, rather, you pay the license fee in advance, even if you don't think it's justified. This happened to music too. This is the blurred lines effect. I was thinking about it this morning. It was before blurred lines. It was happening. It happened to Led Zeppelin, but they were arguably in the ripoff zone. But both bands were ripping off classical music anyway. So come on, Judge, use your head. But in the case of blurred lines, involving a Canadian act, by the way,
I'm not familiar.
you know, there's nothing being stolen here except the atmosphere, and that atmosphere wasn't invented by Marvin Gaye. It was invented by Ray Charles. Listen to Tell Me What I Say. It's right there. The people talking in the background having fun. It sounds like he's playing in a bar. Oh, well, that's a great idea. Let's rip it off. No, you're not ripping off something that can be copyrighted. That's just ambiance. That's just production. And poor Thicke, what's his first name? I can't remember. Alan Thicke's kid, Robin Thicke. I mean, he got persecuted for that, and then he got persecuted for groping the nude models. I mean, what are nude models there for? I feel sorry for the poor schmuck. But
I am not endorsing groping.
But that kind of stupid intellectual property law, I agree, it stifles. But here again, I don't know how it happened in Canada. In the United States, it's written into our Constitution. Patent and copyright law is written into our Constitution. I think it's rent seeking, and the founders thought it was rent seeking too. They thought it would be beneficial rent seeking because you reward the creator for a period of time to provide him the benefit of his creation. That was the theory. But as you point out now, in the days of rapid iteration, all you're really doing is slowing people down while they figure out ways to reverse engineer what they could do straight out of the box, because it's obvious just looking at what's going on. It's obvious what's happening. It's not something that really ought to be protected. We're now talking about protecting algorithms as intellectual property, but now we're also talking about protecting, obvious solutions to obvious problems and calling them intellectual property and saying that people need to get rewarded for life plus 150 years or whatever for something that was completely obvious on its face and was probably invented 17 times before it was ever successful in the first place, and now is easy enough to duplicate. And
if the nail was invented today, it would be
unbelievable. Yeah, no, the licensing fees would go on forever, would be endless. And, licensing fees and sub-licensing fees and sub-licensing fees, etc. I mean, and, I don't have a good solution for this problem, because the original argument incentivizing invention is not a terrible one, except that it literally involves force of arms, that the government is going to hunt you down, lock you up, and possibly kill you for violating somebody else's intellectual property. Why don't you do this privately? Why don't you find a way to solve your problem that doesn't involve coercing your neighbors? Because I think by coercing your neighbors, you're already worse. We're not talking about marriage. We're talking about anarchy. But that is my answer to all of those things. Likewise, you mentioned before we started, you mentioned liability limitation. That's another big rent-seeking benefit created by the government for the benefit of entrepreneurs to provide them with the capital that they need to grow their businesses big and fast. So the passive investors have no risk beyond their initial and beyond their investment, whatever it is. So you put $100,000 in, the company causes $100 million in damages, your liability is $100,000. Well, that just encourages bad management. It's not even a matter of penalizing the executives of the company. All of the investors of the company are complicit. For instance, in East Palestine, again, you mentioned it, I'm sorry.
This is great.
We said before we started that we were going to talk about marriage, and undoubtedly we will, but first we're covering the rest of the universe just to make sure that
so if Norfolk Southern, the story I gather from all the information I've seen was that they have these boxes that test the temperature of the wheels as they go by
Right,
to try to detect fires. And the
right.
fire had started miles and miles away from East Palestine, but the boxes some executive made a decision to increase the temperature at which these boxes set off an alarm. So the first box didn't detect it, and then by the time the second box, I don't know how far apart they are, but it detected it, and then they took action, but it was too late, and the disaster happened.
It's the Tiger Tunnel from
So
Atlas
this
Shrugged.
exec to me,
It's the Tiger Tunnel. They had every opportunity to avoid the tragedy, and they didn't.
you're talking
But
about Ayn
really,
Rand. Ayn
what?
Rand.
From Ayn Rand, from Atlas Shrugged, yeah.
Right. So there was no regulations, and the regulations are besides the point.
Right.
I don't think you can never make enough regulations that's going to
No.
make it safe. It's about the liability. And to me, this executive, and I know it's not not much of an anarchist, to put this executive in jail for a long time, who made these decisions that led
Oh, I don't. I'm not
directly.
disagreeing with that. That's okay. That's fine. But the liability extends beyond the executive. He made a poor decision, but he was, incentivized, authorized to make that poor decision by the
Amen.
the corporate climate he's living in, and that's literally controlled by the investors. It's the investors who are responsible. The owner of the business, if it were your business, you hung out a shingle, you didn't organize as a limited liability corporation or anything like that, you just did business in your own name, your liability would be unlimited. It would be limited to everything you own and possibly everything you might produce for the rest of your life if you make a catastrophic mistake, which would be your incentive not to make a catastrophic mistake, to be
Right.
extremely careful about everything, not to avoid making a $100 billion mistake, but to avoid having to eat even one job. I'm sorry, I had to bake your cake twice because I wasn't paying attention. I didn't make any money on this job, but so too bad for me. You don't want to do that in business. Nobody does. Nobody wants to lose money in business, which is what liability limitation does. Is it makes it easy for investors to make stupid, risky bets because all they lose is what they put on the table. They don't have to incur the liability that results from risky choices.
Mhm.
So the executive wouldn't make the stupid choice if he weren't incentivized by his ownership, and it's the ownership who should pay. The Norfolk Southern Railroad should be owned by the people of East Palestine and their survivors, because everybody in
Oh,
East Palestine is going to die.
well, I don't. That's speculative.
Yes, it is.
I hope it's not. I hope it doesn't come to that. But yeah, that would be just in my mind.
But absent
I
liability
am the justice
limitation,
hero.
nothing like that would have happened in the first place because nothing would ever get that big. What we do, the motive was to let things get big. That's why they did it. It wasn't. This is not in the U.S. Constitution. It's written into state constitutions, and not originally. It's not there in 1791 when the United States was actually founded. It occurred later, 60, 70, 80 years later in many cases.
So we were
And it was done by lobbying. It was done by business interests lobbying to make it easy for them to raise capital by eliminating the risk for the investors.
It seems what we have is the corporate amalgamation. It seems to fall into down to three, and at which point, like we had the big three automakers here. Um, in Canada, we have basically three different telecoms. It seems once they get down to three, then the government starts
And
stepping in and
that's the
saying,
way
"Whoa,
they
whoa, whoa.
want it.
We need at least three. Three is the minimum to have like basic competition." Right now, we have five banks in Canada, like five main banks, and they're holding it at five because I don't think the government will have any control if they got down to three. We'd completely be ruled by the financial institutions. But if you eliminate limited liability, nobody would be able to handle that much liability. Is this what
I
would?
mean, that ultimately, I don't know. I mean, this is a stupid thing to be talking about, really, because I don't see it happening. I would go with default custody to fathers before getting rid of liability limitation, just because the people who are most benefited by it are the people who are most powerful in politics. They want it that way. It's a beautiful system. You privatize the profits to yourself, and you socialize the losses to the schmuck down the street. And who is that schmuck? He's the schmuck who hasn't figured out how to do it to the other schmuck down the street. That really is what it boils down to. It's not about the rich versus the poor. Ultimately, it's about the conniving versus the gullible. And the gullible end up getting stuck with everything because the conniving are willing to figure out a way to connive it so that it turns out that way. And the gullible just shrug and say, oh, well, what are we going to do? We can't have the collapse of the banking system, so everybody's got to pay. Well, no. The beautiful thing that the Silicon Valley Bank, the wonderful thing about letting that bank fail would be that it would put everyone else on notice to count their kopecks right away to make sure that your money is actually secure. The Federal Depositor Insurance Corporation in the United States just guarantees bad management by bankers because they have no reason to be good stewards of their assets. They're going to get bailed out anyway. If there were private depositor insurance, then the banks would get audited. They would be audited once a quarter at least, and they would be audited in depth every year. Every year when they do their final reporting, they would be audited to the last penny by their underwriters, by their insurance underwriters, because that's the only way the insurance underwriter has proof that the deposits are actually secure. And if they have that proof, then they'll never have to pay. This is the essence. The perfect kind of insurance business is an insurance business where if you do everything right, you never have to pay a claim. And that could easily exist for depositor insurance, because if it were privatized, the auditing would make sure that bad banking would never last for longer than 1 quarter. We are incredibly stupid in the way that we manage everything, but that is a particularly galling example right now.
Yeah, this is like, so we went from one train wreck to another train wreck.
Right.
That is still, it is still occurring. Like the cars are, the initial collision has happened, and the cars are just starting to pile up, and we're going to see what happens to this financial institution. How many cars are going to get wrecked, and are we going to have to set the whole thing on fire again?
That's the goal, I'm afraid. The goal is to set the entire world on fire, to destroy all the evidence of the corruption of the last 75 years.
Oh my God.
There's entirely too much evidence. They're going to have to arrest Trump next week in order to shout down the evidence that's accumulating against the Biden family. But there's so much evidence of global corruption, not just by the United States, but by all of the Western powers, that we're going to have to blow up everything in order to burn all that evidence, in order to say, oh, well, there's no way to tell what happened now. I guess we just have to press on like we were before.
Set it ablaze.
I hope I'm wrong. I want to be wrong. I desperately want to be wrong. We have been living in a black swan universe since 2020. Really, literally. Universe? What?
A black swan universe?
A black swan universe where this is a logic problem going back to England, or going back to the bourgeoisie, that there were no black swans. There were only white swans. And so if you referenced a black swan, you were talking about something impossible. And then they went to Australia and found black swans, completely destroyed the logic problem. But the argument of the black swan, and Nicholas Taleb, he's a internet personality, he's out there, but he wrote a book about it. It's the thing that never happens. The thing that never happens is the thing that will wallop you right upside the face when it does happen, because you're completely not expecting it. And we've been living in a black swan universe since 2020. Everything that's happened since January of 2020 has been completely unexpected. COVID, George Floyd, the riots all summer, the election, the vaccine, the vaccines, the vaccine deaths, the war in Ukraine, war all over the place. Anyway, we don't even pay attention to all the other wars that are going on because of the war in Ukraine. The Nord Stream pipeline. I mean, there's no limit to what we could talk about. East Palestine, the Silicon Valley Bank, the collapse of the banking system worldwide. This has been going on basically unrelentingly since 2020. And, even if we look at small stuff like the price of eggs shooting up so much more than the insane rate of inflation, but inflation itself, just more black swan stuff everywhere you look. since January of 2020, we are being hit by things that never ever happen.
And
And they're all happening one after another. And I don't see any abatement in that process. To the contrary, I think we're living in a black swan decade, and God help us, it's not a black swan century.
and they're indicting Trump, and they're going to indict, or they're indicting Trump and indicting Putin at the same time.
Putin will walk.
They're just making stuff up at this point, and then it's raccoon dogs and everything, anything to distract from attention from the ones that have made this mess. So
Correct.
after
Correct.
this,
And meanwhile, the country least likely to suffer from the banking crisis is Russia. The United States made Russia immeasurably stronger with its sanctions. Russia is a healthy economy. I mean, I'm sure it's as corrupt as it always was, but it's a healthy economy. And, you know, the gas and oil business that they're doing is giving them hard currency. It's a gold-backed currency. The only gold-backed currency in the world is the ruble. This is a really stupid game the United States is playing. Meanwhile, you know, easily conceivable that what we're doing, that what the purpose of the Biden administration is the exsanguination of the United States, to literally let all the blood out of the country so that China can take Taiwan, and God help us, so that China doesn't take us. I've heard the argument that China wants America for the farmland. They don't give a shit about the people, the intellectual capital, the existing capital base. None of that. What they want is the farmland so they can feed their people. I don't find, you know, I have no way of crediting that. I'm strictly gauging in nothing but extremist conspiracy theories. But it certainly is what we deserve in the United States. We made ourselves a bovine people, and the Chinese see us as cattle. What a big surprise.
Yeah, I think China really, their real power is administrative. I think they've basically got control of the Canadian government, and that's speculation too on my part. But the way that our prime minister here is trying to deflect from any kind of usually they love whistleblowers, right? But some whistleblower in our intelligence service went to the press. There's a beautiful Globe article right now with from the whistleblower explaining why. I am about a quarter of the way through because I had to get ready for this stream. But it was going on for years, and he was trying to raise alarms, and everybody was doing nothing about it because the prime minister, the ruling party, the courts, the RCMP, our National Police Service, they're all in on it. That's the only explanation is that they're like, yep, China's influencing our election. Let's just see where it goes from here. So he had to go to the press, and it's administrative power that China is just creeping everywhere with their Belt and Road Initiative. It's basically taking control without any military might. They don't need that.
Right.
They will take militarily Taiwan eventually. I don't see any way around it. I have friends who have family in Taiwan. They're like, we're going to visit now because we don't know what's going to happen a year out from now. It's just pretty much inevitable. Militarily, they will take it, and we will be able to do nothing because administratively, we're handcuffed. Anyways, so
the United States has sent all of its weapons to Afghanistan and Ukraine, and has sent all of its oil to China. Our military age citizens are immensely corpulent, and half of them aren't sure if they're really boys. There couldn't be a worse time for the United States to engage in a one theater war. So let's set up a two theater war and see what happens. Oh God. It's why I am focused so much on marriage and family to bring us back around to where we ought to be.
Exactly.
Is because I am most fundamentally concerned with the survivors. I hate to be millennial in the original sense of the word, doom and gloom prophet, arguing for imminent disaster, and yet we've been living through 3 years of one disaster after another, and far from gaining wisdom and doing better in our praxis. Instead, we're doing worse at everything that we do. Everything that we do, when we even are willing to admit that something is a problem, we solve the problem by making it worse, as, for instance, with the critical theory agenda applied to everything, inevitably makes everything worse. Which, of course, the Biden administration is setting out to do anyway, to just turn everyone in the United States into everyone else's enemy, which will again make us a wonderful warfighting machine.
Oh, God.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I am a champion of peace, and I think the perfect peace results from perfect self control and encouraging that, inducing that. I mean, this is what parenthood is for. The purpose of an organism is gestation. The purpose of an adult organism is to engage in gestation to create the next generation of adult organisms who will do the same. The purpose of life is life. And we are poor husbands of life right now, all of us in general, with the exception of the rare testudo dads. And I could easily pick them out in a crowd by the way that the family is dressed, by the way that the family walks, by the way that the older kids manage the younger kids. It's easy to spot a testudo family, but it's because they're rare. But it's those guys who are raising their kids that way who are going to matter going forward, because everyone else, one way or another, is resigning from the human race. God help us, it's not by nuclear incandescence, but even allowing for a return to something like normality, to something like a white swan universe where things proceed on a normal and expected course, even if it's different from 2019. God help us, none of that happens. But even if it doesn't, the way that we're raising our children and the way that our children are raising themselves when they get to the age when they can make their own choices, these choices are infecund. These choices will not result in reproduction.
Speaking of
Certainly not propitious reproduction. And lacking that, there is no continuity. There is no next generation.
speaking of children,
Yes.
there's on the right we have two camps we seem to be dividing into, and I'm talking about the new right, kind of. I don't know what to call it, but you have these traditional Catholics who are definitely pro-marriage, and we need them on side. We have Matt Walsh and Aaron McIntyre is one great one that they see everything from a Christian perspective, a theistic perspective. I believe we're both atheistic. We don't have I don't follow any religious. I don't have any religious propensity. But on the other hand, you have these. They appear to be on the right, but they're a group of bodybuilder,
Mhm.
professional debauchery artists who want to. Bronze Age pervert would be one, where you tune into them, and then suddenly they're talking about how to get um, the girl infatuated with you, and then how to turn one girl into a harem of women that will all give you whatever you need, whatever you want at that moment. And to me, it seems to be a perpetual childhood, a childhood man, a teenage man. They don't want to grow up into this uh, leading a family, this father figure to a next generation and pass on. And to me, it's like, I think, why are we talking about self improvement, and why are we talking about eating a dozen eggs a day and building our bodies and being strong, if we're not creating another generation of kids that are going to be just as strong and strong-willed, strong-minded, strong-bodied? Med Gold is another one who I've been following recently, and he has a little side. I wish I'd kept the tweet, because the guy has now been suspended. He was called Yoki Slut was his name, and I tweeted to them. I said, like this, they tweeted some young, fantastic looking girl and said, fantasized about setting her up in an apartment and being able to visit her whenever the need arised. And I said, no, don't you want her to raise your children? And he compared that to making her a sow. And I'm like, no, a sow. Sorry, a sow is a livestock. I get a, if you're a farmer and you have a sow, she's going to give birth to more livestock. I'm talking about husbandry and fatherhood, and we need to inspire some of this sort of. We need to inspire our young men today to look for that. But how can you do that when you have these debauchery artists telling you that no, you deserve some young 20, early 20 or late teenage girl, and you need to be rich and have an apartment and just give her that apartment and you can visit her whenever you need, and you have in any city that you live in. And it's like most guys aren't going to be that rich in the first place, and they don't need a harem. They need a wife. They need one wife.
They need a mother.
Well, yeah, maybe they
what
were
they really what
underfathered, right?
what they need is a father. What they needed a long time ago was a father. And I mean, that's one of the ways that these idiots sell that crap, is by being the father figure for these boys. That's what Jordan Peterson is doing too. He's old enough to be their grandfather, but he's pretending to be their father and telling them to clean their room. I mean, what could be more paternal than that? Than shut up and clean your room. But in the case of the debauchery artists, as you call them, I mean, it's a money making gig. That's really the literal truth of it. Is that there are a significant portion of young men out there who really don't have any prospects. There may be, I don't know what percentage, they say 20%, but it's probably a much smaller percentage of guys who literally can get any woman that they want, and or any woman that they want who is available to them. And that's the claim that the part of the claim they always leave out, because the best women are unavailable to them, of course.
They have
But
respect.
yeah, no, they're available as sexual targets. They're not on their radar, and they're not on the girls' radar either. They do not, the Venn diagrams of their social environments do not share anything other than possibly city streets and subways. They're just not in communication with each other. The best women are not in bars. If you meet a great woman in a bar, it's because she's there for a birthday party or something like that. The best women are not in bars. It's crazy. But these undersexed men down to zero, completely involuntarily celibate men, are convinced that their problem can be solved, and these gigantic assholes pretend to sell them a solution, and the solution doesn't work. But the way that crap works, it's the same as for sales training or any other milking scheme. The problem is you. If it's not working, of course this works. You've seen me do it 100 times. You know it works. If it's not working for you, the problem is you. Spend some more money, study some more, work harder. And it really is sick, because these guys are going out and they're literally looking for wives. That's literally what they want, are wives to build a life with. And they're going out and they're meeting nothing but sluts. And they're trained by their debauchery artists to focus on the IS slut, the queen bee. The SI sluts are actually available to them, but really only for one night at a time. The poor SI sluts are looking for husbands, and they're also looking in exactly the wrong place and going at it exactly the wrong way. I mean, it is really, truly tragic. Even ignoring the sexual politics of critical theory Marxism, just looking at the further fruits of feminism on the dating scene, it's truly amazingly tragic that we have men who can't get laid and women who can't stop getting laid, and neither party ever forms a stable long-term relationship. Just a dating relationship that is exclusive and extends longer than a few weeks doesn't happen for these kids. It's really sad. And the short answer is set a better example. I mean, that's my answer to all men who want this to improve, is set a better example. That's literally all you can do at this point. But the ultimate solution is the one that I always offer: default custody to the father. That We have underfathered children because we kicked fathers out of the house. We invented all kinds of ways to either dispossess dad of his children, of his wife, of his marriage, of his household, of his estate, to do that legally, or to so undermine him that he knows if he tries to assert any sort of paternal authority, he will be dispossessed of everything that he's built over the last 20 or 40 years. And so we end up with children who have absolutely no examples of how to comport themselves in a romantic relationship, and therefore they screw them up every single time. They screw them up if they actually get a chance.
They fall into the hands of an Andrew Tate, or it's either Andrew Tate or it's Jordan Peterson, like you said. If it's Jordan Peterson, I say most of what he says is good. I know he's not going to jump on this default custody to the father.
Oh, I don't even care about that. It literally is just men looking for a father figure. And they're not wrong to be looking for a father figure. They're right to be looking for a father figure because it's what they're missing. It's what the women are missing too. Someone to set boundaries, to say this conduct is unacceptable. And Jordan Peterson is perfect in that role.
It's a flip coin. It's a flip side of the coin of feminism, right? They're basically giving feminists what they want. Feminists want that instant gratification. They want sexual gratification and to be independent, and they think that's what's going to make women happy. And it turns out that women are far less capable of withstanding that kind of pressure than men are. But men they're also vulnerable to this if they continue down this lifestyle. You see the one, what was his name? He was a pickup artist, and then he turned into a traditional Catholic guy.
Oh, Roach V?
Yes.
Yeah.
So he realized there's just no end to this. It just goes down and further down and further down.
His life before then was just amazingly dissolute too. He was the debauchery king. And so it is a cool thing. You mentioned religion, and I think it's interesting. I'm an atheist, and I think it really is a problem, to be honest with you. Christianity is not of the essence, and this is what you'll get from that side of the manosphere. The religious side of the manosphere is almost entirely Christian and kind of intolerantly Christian in a way that doesn't strike me as being all that useful or fruitful. I wrote a story called Why Madeline Wynne is Always Going to Win. And it was about a little Viet girl, really young, 39 months old, very young, which is very young. To build a literary character out of a child that young is not easy. But I loved her. There's a real girl behind the story. The story is really not much of a story, but I really wanted to celebrate the upbringing of this little girl because she's being raised in a Viet family. And I don't know if they're Viet Christians or if they're Buddhists or what, but they're being raised in the faith tradition that the parents were raised in. And they're being raised by the parents, by their parents' brothers and sisters, by the parents' cousins, by this huge extended family of Vietnamese people living in Phoenix, all sharing the same religion, all sharing the same expectations. And therefore, the child grows up in this environment where there are no questions, there are no doubts. The kind of grown-up doubts that we hear young children, 5 and 6 year old children entertain. This will never occur to Madeline Wynne until she's much older. That's not really her name. I wouldn't dox the poor kid. But those kind of doubts won't occur to her until much later. Those kind of questions won't occur to her until much later, until they're raised in some kind of formal way, like in school or whatever, because she has no doubts about everything. Everything around her is exactly as everyone around her expects it to be. And therefore, there is no chaos in her life. And that chaos is unfortunately in everyone's life now. And as an atheist, I am myself setting a poor example because I'm not surrounded by brothers, sisters, cousins, friends who all live according to my moral standards and therefore who are all upholding the same expectations and raising the children in. And, every family is a fishbowl. we're not aware of the water that we swim in until we're aware that we're in a fishbowl and that the rest of the water is not the same as the water in our fishbowl. But as long as this is again a kind of an extension of the testudo metaphor and putting it into aquariums instead, as long as that fishbowl is protecting the children in particular from negative outside influences, then the children don't know that there are any negative outside influences. And that's just a wonderful thing for the first 5-6 years of life. It's perfect. And if you could sustain it for 10 or 12, so much the better. But that's something that we can't do. You can't do it. I can't do it. And practically speaking, almost no one who looks like us can do it. Not even the Latter-day Saints. I praised them to you last week. The Latter-day Saints used to be much, much better at maintaining that testudo family than they are now, and in consequence, their fecundity is falling off the charts, just like everybody else's.
Yeah, we're living in an atomized society, and increasingly atomized, where you see less. A young person sees less and less order, and marriage is not an essential part of their worldview, and like it was back in the, say, the homestead era, where
Right.
you needed these, you had roles that were necessary. There was real heavy physical labor that only a man could do, and the woman could only do a certain amount of certain kinds of the labor that were necessary in the home, and they were more suited to those roles, and together they served each other, and it worked. Now societies tend to formalize these things, and it makes a formal rules, and everybody follows those rules as long as they are taught them and see them being followed everywhere. And now modernity has wiped that out.
Yep.
It solved a lot of the problems that marriage used to solve, like how do we care for the children that come from these unions?
Poor
And
solution, though. It's a poor solution. Both parents should be home. This is
well, yes.
what modernity did to us, whether it was Marxism or just capitalism doing it to us. It got both parents out of the home, whereas in fact both parents should be in the home. Your work should be at home, and her work should be at home, and the children should see you working at home, because that's how they learn how to provide for themselves as grown-ups, by knowing that it's not something that you go off to. It's a mystery that takes you away from the family. No, it's a part of your family life, and you're a part of it too. As the kids get older, they should be pitching in.
I see that working in a homestead. I don't see that working when we have factories and offices and all.
Again, this is a problem of liability limitation. This is what we did, is we went out of our way to engineer society in such a way that it would be most beneficial to the investor class and least beneficial to ordinary people. And the fact that we go along with it is strictly incidental. It's not necessary. I mean, every testudo dad I know is amazingly productive in whatever he does. Some of them are working at kind of homesteading and rustic things, but some of them are coders. But they built their businesses, whatever businesses they run, they built them in such a way that they can be at home with the family all the time. Or if they have to be out of the house, then two or three of the kids can be in the pickup with them, and the older ones are going to be helping out, loading the truck to take it back home or whatever. The family is involved with itself all the time, and everybody's doing everything they can to support every mission critical function of the family, because that's what a family does. And by tokenizing those tasks and saying, oh, well, dad has to leave the home to provide for the family, and you have to go to school because that's your silly role, and mom has to go off to a job where she can be some other man's husband all day and come home to you children, and you're all dissatisfied because you've been around strangers all day, and everybody's annoyed with each other, and everybody's commuting 90 minutes minimum every freaking day. This is insane. It's exactly the opposite of happy family life. And so ultimately, I'm not criticizing you. I'm not criticizing me. I'm not criticizing anyone. I'm just saying that for men who want to be as good as they can be as fathers, especially when the children are very young, finding a way to make a living from your home works better. And the same thing for women. Whatever you need to do to provide income for the family, finding a way to do it from home is infinitely better than anything that you're going to do outside the home. Whatever you're making at your office job, you're pissing away half of it in taxes and the other half in daycare fees. So, in what way would staying home and doing ironing? Mrs. Zarnes in our neighborhood used to do ironing. Staying home and doing ironing, for $10 an hour probably nets out to better cash. And meanwhile, you're home with your children in their formative years. When they're growing up, eventually they won't need you anymore. They'll go off on their own. And that's the time for mom to go to college, not at 18, but at 28, when her youngest has basically left the nest, is out of the home a lot and doesn't need mom around all day. That's a good time for mom to devote herself to a college education if she insists that she needs one. But meanwhile, dad should focus his attention on being home as much as he possibly can, working at home for as much as he possibly can, and ideally structuring his life in such a way that he makes his livelihood from his home so that he's never away from his children.
I definitely would have structured my life differently.
Likewise.
Had I known what I know now.
Precisely. And that is the benefit for old guys like us, frankly. Young guys, if you're listening in, you can benefit from the example and the bad life lessons learned by old guys like us by making mistakes that you don't have to make if you pay attention.
Looking back, my kids are teenagers now, and the best period of my life and our family's life was the extended period when my second son was born, and my wife stayed at home for over almost 3 years.
Yeah.
And it was just so remarkable. She was happy, we were happy, and we started talking about her going back to work, and it just was it worked out okay. But it was just so much, like the stress level just went skyrocketing.
Yep.
The kids were getting dropped. Like, luckily they went to the same daycare. We found one daycare that had 2 spots for their age groups. But then it was just the stress on all of us went up. It was so much harder to manage. It would have been beautiful if for at least 5 years until they were at school, but 28 years, that's extreme. I would
not 28, 10, just an extra 10. It might not be 10. It might be more than that. It depends on how many kids. When women married at 18, they had 3 children by age 30. And so the ones who were going to have 5 had 5 by age 40, and age 40 is really kind of pushing it. So, I mean, the British Empire, God bless us, the British Empire was conquered by gallant men who were birthed by incredible women, because those women had to give birth to 10, 12 babies each in order to send 5 sons off in the British Navy. But if we take the prime childbearing years and turn those into corporate years instead, we take 3 by 30 and we turn it into 0 by forever. That at most a woman will have 1 or 2, and 2 is really a remarkable number. And God help her, the marriage lasts, because that's another one. If you watch the videos on Twitter, these poor women lamenting that their marriages have fallen apart because they deferred the further fruits of marriage for 10 or 15 years because they're both trying to make it in the corporate world. And, by the time they get around to it, she needs fertility treatment and he's really had enough. He needs a 22-year-old. And this is the beautiful thing about getting married young and staying committed, being completely monogamous, having a devout commitment to monogamy, is marriage goggles. That you have this image of this woman that you married and it kind of never really changes. And she's still as hot as she was when she's 18, until you let your eyes stray over the fence and decide the grass is greener on the other side. Until you do that, until you become Mr. Maybe, your wife is as beautiful as she was the day that you married her, and she's just as enthralling, and she's just as exciting, and she's just as interesting, just as fun. And marriage is a lifelong conversation that ideally you never want to end. and that conversation just gets better and better the longer you're together. She never really changes from the dewy-eyed 18-year-old that you married, and yet she gets better and better and better because you know each other better and better over the years. I'm a champion of marriage for all kinds of practical reasons, but I'm a champion of marriage because it's the absolute best emotional state that humanity can achieve. We are best when we are married. We're best when we're parents, but we're not parents forever. We're married forever, and we are best when we're married. And making that commitment, realizing that the benefit is long-term, often seems hidden, is hard to get at sometimes, is difficult to surmount, whatever obstacles you want to put in your way. Everything worth having has obstacles, but nothing is more worth having than a happy marriage.
Yeah, I'll take the familiarity I have with my wife, knowing everything about her. That, well, there's always something I don't know about her, but there's the knowing what how she likes to be held and how she likes to be kissed, and all those familiar things. When I walk into the kitchen and she's sipping her coffee, I know what's in her coffee. I know what she's probably watching on the television screen and on her computer. I'll take that level of familiarity because the closeness that you get is just such a great feeling compared to any one night stand or 2 week trip to some far off exotic location with some young hot girl. you know I'll take this familiarity at this age in my life over any of that, or any of the like wild stories that I could tell you, that people can tell about the affairs that they had or what they did with whoever, kind of some young slut that they ran into.
Stories always improve. Stories
Th-
always improve.
there's no question, right? I'd be about a 50-year-old sitting there telling stories that to buddies that they've all heard before, and then going online and bragging about how wonderful, amazing my life as a single man with kids that are living in a different house or whatever else, whatever state part, the way my life would be at this stage. I'll take right now with kids living in my house, watching them turn into young men. I'll take that over any of these debauchery artists can offer.
I don't even
What
think
they're
it's
selling.
tempting. If you just do the logic on what they're saying, is that you can bag virgins incessantly, and amazingly enough, they'll all be virgins again tomorrow morning. Um, I mean, literally, it's all about, it's a kind of demonic. And you mentioned dark forces. I'm not sure if it was on the podcast or not. But it's kind of demonic in the sense that what the Lothario seeks is the very innocence that he seeks to destroy. And as soon as the girl is no longer innocent, she's no longer interesting to him, nor to any of the rest of them, except as a temporary conquest. But it's that dewy-eyed virginal innocence, the sweethearted girl who will believe any bullshit you feed her. That's what they want, and of course, that's exactly what they corrupt. It's what they ruin, and that need never get ruined. It's this. I read another different story about love at first sight. Love at first sight seems impossible to us, but it only seems impossible to us because we're so bad at romance. But it's, in fact, it's the story behind half of all successful romantic stories that is people who met each other, were instantly attracted to each other, and then never did anything to repel each other. I mean, that's literally it. That's the whole story of love at first sight. And it's the most amazing thing, because if you do it at the right age, if you do it when you're innocent and she's still innocent, then the two of you are innocent forever. And this is backed up by statistical evidence. I don't really care about tabulations, but I think it's fun that it is demonstrated statistically that the people who are happiest in their marriages are the ones who married young, never slept with anyone, either before or after marriage, never slept with anyone else, that they are literally one partner each, one notch each. And these are the people who are happiest in their marriages because they're not constantly looking over the fence to figure out if there's something better on the other side. There isn't anything better than that. There isn't anything better than that. And it's just wonderful that it's borne out that way. The same thing, women who stay married, women who have children, women who stay married to the husbands of their children, women who stay married to the husbands of their children even after the children are gone. These women are invariably happier, again, statistically demonstrated by tabulators. But I mean, it's obvious why it would be so, because they have a continuity of expectations where every other sort of romantic relationship results in nothing but chaos and turmoil, which incidentally is horrible for the children. We talk about 5 years old. This is the age of conceptual fluency for children. This is when children learn how to think in the interior monologue. That's when it initiates. It's a big surprise for them. I love it. I love to spot it when it happens. I have a little card that I give to children, a little diploma that I give them to congratulate their graduation into full-blown humanity. But that's when marriages fall apart. If you look at when marriages fall apart, young people get married age 22, age 23, whatever, 25, 27, they get married. They have a kid, 1 or 2 years into the marriage, they have a kid. And when the kid gets to be about 5 or 6, that's when the marriage falls apart. It's the absolute worst time for the child. They call it transitions. The psychologists call it transitions. But dad moves in, dad moves out, mom moves away. Mom and the kids move out. New guy moves in with mom. Mom moves in with her folks. Mom's uncle moves in with mom. All of these things going on, and at the age the child is 6, 7, 8 years old. 6, 7, 8 transitions happen in 3 or 4 years. And each one of these is chaotic for the child. Each one of them sets the child back in developmental terms. And it's exactly what we've engineered with our marriage and family laws is not only do we destroy families and dispossess fathers of their patrimony, but we do it at exactly the worst time.
Wow. So we're getting up on, we're just over an hour now.
Always good.
We started from snowboarding, went to limited liabilities, corporatism, and some global politics, and then we landed on where the solution
we said we were going to be.
The solution lies. Where we said we were going to start was with marriage, and I think on this road, I think this has been an amazing discussion. I think we're going to have another one maybe in about. I'm thinking about 2 weeks. If we could do this every 2 weeks, it might be doable.
Okay.
For me, I'm a busy family man. I know you're busy real estate, whatever it is you do.
Yep.
And I think the goal from here on in is to find more areas where we can agree and inspire people, young people, hopefully, to follow what some kind of ideal marriage can be. And it doesn't have to be a Christian marriage.
Right.
But I don't have any problem with Christian. I think Christianity laid out a good groundwork for marriage. And I think we could build on that and move marriage forward from whatever happens in this train wreck we're living through in global politics and finance right now, because marriage will persevere.
Has to. And frankly, I don't want to celebrate things getting bad, but the worse things get, the less room there is for mistakes. The people at the margins have no margin for error. And we subsidize the margins right now. And at the point where we have to stop subsidizing the margins, a whole lot of marginal behavior will stop just like that, because people were married for millennia because they had to be. The social machine was necessary to make the gestation and upbringing of children possible. Both parents had to be working maximally 18 hours a day to get everything necessary done to keep the children alive. And in the last 150 years, it's gotten a whole lot easier. My claim would be, this is something we might take up again later, is that every adult woman has a husband or a pimp. And we've gotten very good. The federal government has gotten very good at being the pimp for a whole lot of women who ideally should be married and would be doing better for themselves, for their children, and for their husbands, for the community, for the nation as a whole. They'd be doing better if they were married. But we subsidize their dissolute lifestyle. It's not quite debauchery, but it is equally destructive. And by subsidizing that marginal behavior, we make it possible. And as soon as the subsidies stop, that marginal behavior stops just like that.
And the necessity for marriage will reassert itself.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
We can't live without it. We literally can't live without it. It is the survival machine of civilized humanity. That the other one, we didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about NRX, which is out there, neo-reactionary. That's sort of a source of this alt manosphere content. But the other end of it is simply the paleo argument that monogamy is not natural. That's what they say to me all the time. Monogamy is not natural. And it's ridiculous to speak of anything of humanity being natural. Everything of humanity is man-made, obviously. But in terms of devising a machine that best achieves human survival at the individual level, at the family level, at the community level, and at the national level, lifelong monogamy is obviously superior to every other form of family organization. It's what built the West, for God's sake. It's our abandonment of it is what's destroying the West right now.
I think nature can take many forms. Nothing can go against nature. You can only use it in a way that will lead to ideal outcomes or subpar outcomes or devastating outcomes, right?
Right.
You're either
Right.
going to end up with a rotting swamp or a forest of trees standing tall, right? Depending on how you divert or how you direct the stream of nature.
We are descended from people who were not wrong.
Exactly.
Everyone is descended from people who are not wrong. And whether or not we have descendants is contingent on our getting enough right. And arguably, we're not getting enough right now, but we can do better.
We can do better. And we will discuss more about this in upcoming streams. And hopefully this was recorded correctly. I don't know what I'm doing. Hopefully you can watch this again, and then we'll have far more topics to discuss and ways to discuss the topics that we have talked about in the upcoming streams. So I thank you.
Good on you. You were great. I would say to anybody who actually endured this, like, subscribe, do whatever you can do, but ideally submit questions, because your questions will guide us to what we need to talk about. So I think this was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Greg. And all the best to you. And see you next time. Take care.
Bless you. Thank you.